must understand that the patience of the international community has come to an end. At the same time, the Union has a moral duty to continue mobilizing life-saving humanitarian funding, especially as all indications are that humanitarian needs will pick up again during the first quarter of 2015, with 2.5 million people expected to be in need of food assistance alone. Let us be clear, the humanitarian crisis in South Sudan is a man-made crisis. The political leaders whose actions have created the tremendous human suffering are finally also the ones to bring back peace and initiate reconciliation, because the world's youngest nation deserves better than a lost generation of child soldiers and a continuation of a senseless conflict. South Sudan needs a transitional government of national unity which looks after the well-being of all its citizens and creates conditions in which the country can prosper. Again, thank you for your attention.
I received the draft resolution that closes the debate from the Greens, from the European Left Alliance, ECR, and the United Left, the EFDD group, as well as Socialists and Democrats, and last but not least the EPP group. So we can close the debate on this particular point, and we will vote on this resolution tomorrow. Next point on the agenda is joint debate, amendments to agreements with EEA countries and Switzerland. It's about changing the protocol number 31 to the current protocol when it comes to cooperation in particular areas. For instance, the EURES program, but not only, also special financial instrument. And we will have a special statement of the European Commission concerning cooperation in specific areas. And last but not least, the final position that is to be taken on behalf of the EU in a special committee that is to be established based on the agreement between the EEA countries and Switzerland. And it's all based on the free movement of people. Appendix number 2 will have to be amended correctly. On behalf of the European Commission, I would like Madam Marianne Thyssen to take the floor, and I would like to take this opportunity and congratulate you, Madam, on the new responsibilities.
Yeah. Dear President, thanks a lot for your congratulations. Honourable members of the Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, the point of today's agenda concerns 2 decisions of the European Economic Area Joint Committee and 1 decision of the European-Swiss Joint Committee on Free Movement of Persons Agreement. Let me start with the first 2 decisions, which concerns Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein. The first one concerns the amendment to Protocol 31 to the EEA Agreement, which enables the EEA EFTA states to participate in the EU Programme for Employment and Social Innovation, EaSI, and in the European Progress Microfinance Facility for Employment and Social Inclusion. It also foresees a financial contribution by these countries based on the same distribution key as EU member states. The second decision concerns the amendment to the same Protocol 31 in order to provide for cooperation regarding the free movement of workers, the coordination of social security systems and measures for migrants, including migrants from third countries. The EEA EFTA states, Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, participate fully in the EU rules for the free movement of workers and for social security coordination. The aim of this second Council decision is therefore to continue cooperation in this area through a financial contribution of the EEA EFTA states to the monitoring of Union law on such issues. The decision is adopted every year and has become a standard procedure since the conclusion of the EEA Agreement. The Council adopted both decisions, establishing the EU position to be taken in the EEA Joint Committee on 5 June, and the EEA Joint Committee adopted the decisions amending the EEA Agreement on June the 27th. As regards the decision of the EU-Swiss Joint Committee on the Free Movement of Persons Agreement, the Commission submitted to the Council the draft decision amending Annex II to the agreement. The Council's decision is expected for November the 25th. This fourth adaptation incorporates new EU legal provisions in order to ensure the consistent and correct application of Union legislation and to avoid administrative and possible legal difficulties. This is a technical amendment that will incorporate the changes to the EU legislation, for instance, those concerning persons working in 2 or more member states, and that will help clarify to determine which legislation applies. I would like to highlight, Mr. President, that the adoption of this decision will contribute to ensuring that the same rules are applied on the coordination of social security systems, whether EU citizens live and work in Switzerland or in another EU member state. So far, this declaration. Thank you.
And now, on behalf of EPP, Mr. Mann, for 2 minutes. Unless he's now watching a football match of his team.
Thank you very much, President. Commissioner, thank you for your contribution. Ladies and gentlemen, a priority for the Parliament and the Commission is to generate new and high-quality jobs. 85% of jobs in the EU are being generated by SMEs. We have to generate a climate which will allow the emergence of new SMEs and promote that. And for the EPP, alongside what we're doing is financial support as well. Progress has proved to be very useful. It's an instrument that allows people to have better access to microcredits. And this was very difficult if you had to go through traditional bank loans. The 20th of October communication from the Commission on implementation has shown that this instrument has provided a very good contribution to generating jobs. More than 20,000 entrepreneurs have entered into drawing down credit of over 180 million euros, and that really gives us a glimmer of hope. And building on the Progress programme, there is the EaSI programme for employment and social innovation. We've seen proof that the demand for microcredit is not been met yet. We're looking about 2.7 billion euros shortfall here. So there has to be some action taken, most notably given the record levels of unemployment in many member states. I'd like to support the expansion of parts of microfinancing to the EEA EFTA states, as Mrs. Thyssen has just set out. The European Economic Area, as a deepened free trade area, certainly enlarges our free trade area, single market, to 31 states. And if we're looking at these states, we're not just strengthening trade and also helping out on the front of providing workers, but also we need to have coordination with other financial instruments such as the European Social Fund that we have. I think that's absolutely essential.
Jutta
Steinruck on behalf of Socialists and Democrats.
Madam Commissioner, first of all, on behalf of the S&D group in Parliament, I'd like to welcome you to this Parliament, and we're looking forward to working with you. The amendment to Protocol 31 to the EEA Agreement is important because of movement of workers and employment in the European Economic Area, and will further that and foster it. We have a labour market in the European Union where our citizens have the possibility to cross the borders and to avail themselves of the mobility across borders, but a lot remains to be done. But improving coordination, organising workshops and seminars, exchanges, learning from one another, all does bring about improvement, and this is why we support this amendment. And as rapporteur for the EaSI programme, I'm also very delighted that this is also to be extended.
Pani poseł.
Thank you, Madam. And now on behalf of the ECR group, Madam McIntyre.
Thank you, Mr. President. I too would like very much to welcome Mrs. Thyssen here as our new Commissioner, and on behalf of the ECR very much look forward to working with you in the months and years ahead. It seems to me that the three measures that we are looking at are pretty uncontroversial, they're highly technical, it's a standard procedure. I don't really think it's something that this Parliament can influence, and I agree completely with a lot of what Mr. Mann has already said. We have often rehearsed the importance of SMEs to job creation. But here tonight, I find it rather strange that we're sitting here to debate agreements which I believe have already been agreed in the Council and the EEA Joint Committee. So I'm not really sure what our role as a Parliament is, apart from being informed, which of course we have been. I think we shouldn't be wasting parliamentary time on issues where we as legislators have no role in. Not so long ago we listened to Mr. Timmermans, whose role it is for better regulation. I would suggest that as a Parliament we ought to adopt the idea of better regulation to simplify and reduce administrative burdens, and I would urge us as a Parliament to reflect that in our business. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and also for keeping to the time limit. And now the next speaker, Madam Harkin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and I too would like to give a warm welcome to Commissioner Thyssen to the Parliament here this evening on behalf of the ALDE Group in the Parliament, and I too am looking forward to working with you and your Secretariat for the next number of years. I tend to agree with Mrs. McIntyre, and I sometimes do, on the item we are discussing here this evening. I'm not sure what role we play here, maybe other than for information, but nonetheless we are discussing it, so therefore I just have a few comments to make on the amendments that are in front of us. And the first one is to allow the cooperation of the contracting parties to extend to social affairs, and by doing this we will ensure that Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein will be able, for example, to access Progress Microfinance Facility. Now, as we know, this fund was set up to help micro businesses, funds of up to €25,000 for small business, either if they're setting up or expanding. And it's particularly targeted at those who have difficulty accessing credit from conventional credit lines. And I'm very pleased to see this, and I'm pleased to see the good outcomes so far in a recent Commission report as to how this Progress Microfinance Facility has worked, in that it has given over 182 million to over 20,000 entrepreneurs, and the crucial point is that 60% of those final users were unemployed or inactive and 30% were women. So it is getting to those who are targeted, and from that perspective, not only do I think it is an excellent facility within the EU, but I'm glad to see that it will be extended to the EFTA countries. The other amendment we're discussing this evening is the amendment to include cooperation concerning the free movement of workers, and my only comment on that is I, like most people in this Parliament, believe that that is a cornerstone of EU policy, and I will be pleased to see that right extended to the countries in question. Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo, pani poseł. A teraz...
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam D'Amato from the EFDD group.
Good evening, President. Good evening, Commissioner. Good evening to the few members who've stayed this late. I wanted to speak because I work in the Regional Committee, and there I've seen how interdependent the four freedoms are and how much local and regional economies depend on those freedoms in each member state. What I'd like to stress is that the European Union's position on the agreement with the Helvetic Confederation about the free movement of persons and coordination of social security systems should take into account the fact that Switzerland, which benefits from many programs with European financing, like Horizon, for example, subject to conditions, but nonetheless enjoying that benefit, shouldn't be proposing measures against freedom of movement, discriminating against cross-border workers in the way that they did since the referendum in February. They should also be avoiding legal and administrative discrimination of this sort.
Pan poseł Marcel de Graaff.
Mr. de Graaff from Non-Attached. 1 minute.
Meneer de voorzitter.
President, through the change that's being suggested to Protocol 31 to the EEA Agreement, the Commission is trying to allow more migrants to come in from outside the EU, now from Norway. We know what sort of problems we've had with Islamic immigrants in Oslo. We've seen rapes committed by Islamic people there. A country like Norway is allowing Westerners to enter into its country, and then it will now allow them to come into the rest of the EU. This runs counter to the UN's agreements on the possibility for member states to prevent free movement of people when there's a risk of jihadists, so I think this runs counter to international law.
A teraz poproszę panią poseł Veronikę Lope Fontagné.
Madame Lope Fontagné. 1 minute and a half.
Thank you, Mr. President. Commissioner, ladies and gentlemen, ever since it was set up, the European Union has been characterized as a region of economic, social and territorial integration, fighting for freedom and social welfare. With the improvement in the economy, the new European Commission has proposed moving forward on social things as a way to come out of the crisis strengthened, achieving sustainable growth. But to do that, credit has to start flowing again. We can't say often enough that SMEs are keys in growth and the creation of jobs. My colleague Thomas Mann has just said that. But to achieve that, there has to be a consistency in events. If you want, or rather a sequence of events, if you want growth, there have to be jobs. If there are to be jobs, companies have to be able to grow, and they can only do that if they have access to credit. So I'm grateful and I'm glad to see the Union and its external partners going further into these agreements, deepening them and bringing them into community policies which, like today's ones, offer major opportunities to small and medium-sized companies, in particular through microfinance. That will contribute to improving the business fabric of the European Union and therefore improve the welfare of our fellow citizens. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Madam. And now I give the floor to Mr. Gutiérrez Prieto from the Socialists and Democrats. 1 minute.
Thank you, President. freedom of movement is one of the basic pillars with which we built the European Union. So I'm glad to see that this freedom of movement can now be extended in agreements with third countries that are neighbours of ours. But it also is true that freedom of movement is much more than just knocking down frontiers. It's much more than being able to travel without a passport. Freedom of movement has also to guarantee the portability of a series of basic rights within the European Union in order to ensure equal opportunities and rights. Freedom of movement with third countries is good, but it means that we also have to ensure freedom of movement within the European Union, which covers a series of basic rights being portable. Rights to unemployment benefit, to pension, to health, to education. Those are essential pillars of our European social model, and if we believe in European citizenship, then we have to work to ensure that this concept of European citizenship is included in the freedom of movement principle, and that covers the portability of rights within the European Union.
Mr. Petr Mach from the EFDD group. 1 minute.
Dámy a pánové,
Ladies and gentlemen, the European Economic Area, this is an agreement based on 4 freedoms, the free movement of people, goods, services and capital. And this is what I like about European cooperation, and I admire that countries which are in EEA and are not EU members can enjoy these 4 freedoms without all the red tape and bureaucracy that we know in the European Union, without subsidies, programs, the common agricultural policy. These countries do not have to impose European customs, but they can enjoy the 4 freedoms without the red tape. So it would be good not to add anything more into the current agreement. On the contrary, if we dissolve the whole European Union and if we stick to the agreement on the economic area, that would be the best thing to do. Thank you.
Monsieur Gilles Lebreton, 1 minute, s'il vous plaît.
L'accord sur l'espace.
The agreement on the European Economic Area allows countries such as Norway to work together on a case-by-case basis in certain sectors and to cooperate with the EU. We're extending this to actions in favour of migrants, including third country migrants, quote unquote. Now, this means there's a will to improve the situation for migrants. And I think it's rather anachronistic because it's only going to encourage more migrants to come to Europe, whereas we're undergoing in Europe a major economic crisis and we don't have the means to take in these people who are running away from wretchedness. This proposal that we're discussing is totally outdated because it goes against the realism expressed by the European Court of Justice in a ruling issued yesterday. The court recognized the right of states to refuse social aid to migrant workers who are not working, migrants who are not working. The European Parliament seems to be totally cut off from social realities.
And now Mr. Lenaers from the EPP group for 1 minute and a half.
Thank you very much, President. I'd like to thank Ms. Thyssen as well. I think this is her first occasion at 11 o'clock in the evening here in the European Parliament. Shows a great deal of commitment. I'm certainly like to join the other people saying I'm looking forward to our cooperation in the coming 5 years. I'd like to join also in what Mrs. McIntyre and Mrs. Harkin have said, and asking about the value of this debate this evening. In November 2014, we're talking about things that really should have come into effect on the 1st of January 2014. So my question there is, you know, what's been going on over the past 11 months? Secondly, I'm very pleased that we can have a discussion, a debate on free movement of workers, and that we can extend this and the social inclusion to cover Norway, Iceland and Liechtenstein, because they're European countries as well. And I would appeal to make sure there's good coordination of social security in our own EU countries. I think there are areas where we need to improve things. When you have border workers, where there's a question of cross-border care, access to that care, cross-border companies as well, and I hope that over the coming 5 years we can focus on that. I wish you all the success in doing that. Thank you.
Danke wel. Adesso onorevole Sergio Gaetano Cofferati.
Mr. Sergio Cofferati for 1 minute, please. Thank you, President, and welcome and good luck, Commissioner. As you'll know, the freedom movement of workers is one of the fundamental pillars of the European Union. In fact, it's a right of identity. The Union exists insofar as there is the possibility for people in this part of the world to circulate, to move around freely. This is a major advantage for people to realize themselves. It's a major advantage for companies because it means that they have available to them an extraordinary resource that other countries don't have. But freedom of movement expresses a potential. And that means it's important that people who move around for whatever reason, it might be for work, it might be for fun, it might be for some cultural purpose, it's important that there be a coordination of social security systems. People give of their best when they are protected, and otherwise they just look like instruments in the hands of a financial or productive system which is exploiting them and not valuing them. That's why it's very important that the two things should go together: freedom of movement and protection of the individual and recognition of his rights. Thank you.
Grazie tante, onorevole. Madame Marie-Christine Arnautu. 1 minute.
Merci. Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, the regulation laying down an EU programme for employment and social innovation was adopted on the 11th of December last. That's less than a year ago. It provides for a midterm review on the 1st of July 2017. I think it's far too soon to extend its scope to EEA after countries. I think, furthermore, that extending this regulation is somewhat arbitrary and dangerous, especially after yesterday's ruling of the European Court of Justice, which recalls that conditions for providing social welfare lie within the scope of the member states exclusively. According to the court, it is possible for a member state to exclude members of another state from receiving such benefits. And I deplore, as a French woman, that in France, social benefits are often given to people who have actually illegally entered our territory. Thank you for your attention.
Merci beaucoup, Madame Députée. A teraz poproszę Panią.
And now, Madam Jazłowiecka. 1 minute and a half. Thank you, Chairman, President, Madam Commissioner, colleagues. I think that including the EEA countries under many new initiative for the employment and social innovation market is a very good idea. However, the question is, why don't they want to use fully this opportunity? Why they are unwilling to join the program for employment and social innovation? I think it's only Iceland that said yes when it comes to participation in one of the projects. The objective is to work out innovative ways to fight problems with employment, but what worries me is low level of interest of the EEA countries, especially that they do a lot when it comes to social innovation on the employment market. So maybe when they look at our program, they don't see any added value, they only see added costs. That's why maybe it's worthwhile to think whether it has been constructed as a program in the right way, especially that projects such as EURES, for instance, have been criticized for a long time. However, I think that the unwillingness of Norway and Liechtenstein, irrespective of the real reasons, should make us think twice about our program for employment and social innovation. Maybe we should try and modify its mechanism. And then when it comes to the agreement between the EU and Switzerland, what is the European Commission planning to do in relation to the referendum that is going to happen in that country when it comes to quotas for immigrants? Are you planning to do so? What are plans as at today? What the situation looks like when it comes to Switzerland and Croatia and free movement of people? Is full protection really guaranteed? Because Switzerland is using the possibility to freely move its citizens. And I wish you every success, Madam Commissioner.
A teraz poproszę pana posła Tibora Szanyi z Postępowego Sojuszu Socjalistów i Demokratów.
And now, Mr. Szanyi, the floor is yours.
Amiről mi most itt beszélünk, az sokkal fontosabb annál, mint sem ez az itt látható.
Thank you very much. Well, it seems that what we're trying to achieve here is far more important than the presence here in the chamber this evening might give rise to believe. But I can reassure anybody who thinks that we are going to have to protect the European Union from a new wave of immigration. If a European citizen wants to go to a country of the European Economic Area, they will enjoy the same rights as they have here. So this is an act which protects common rights, and even for populistic governments it can't be used as a pretext to discriminate against individuals or people from third countries. So it's a question of individuals that we're looking at, not arbitrary decisions.
Massimiliano Salini, una minuta.
Mr. Massimiliano Salini for a minute and a half. Let me warmly welcome the new Commissioner, first of all, and join my voice to those who are speaking in favour of welcoming her commitment, which we shall certainly need. The Protocol 31 contains a number of important social provisions and business considerations, and also cultural ones, if you like. Of course, there are grey areas here. There are areas where we run risks, and previous speakers have reminded us of these. There is the link with there are risks in the links with movement of persons. There are links with certain states, such as Switzerland. But above all, there's the central issue, which is the mentality which says that a strong Europe is a one with united social policies. That's the first point. For a series of reasons, we've been talking today because of these Luxembourg case about tax. We shouldn't forget also the need to have a roadmap towards harmonizing social things. And then there's a need for an arrangement to support small companies. And then that is also a major cultural issue. Getting out of the crisis now means bringing oxygen to the people who are taking risks, who are running businesses. Above all, if they're not protected by the same network, which very often protects productive networks in our countries. People risking their own money should be supported because they're generating value and they're educating the people.
Yes, Abgeordnete Evelyn Regner, eine Minute bitte.
Herzlichen Dank.
Thank you very much indeed. Commissioner, I'd like to join other colleagues who wished you the best of success in your duties as Commissioner. On this topic now, the EaSI programme is an EU finance programme to help social policies and mobility for workers. It's about social innovation. It's very important At this late hour, if we're talking about this, it's really important that we do not mix fish with fowl, that we do not confuse issues, and that we bear in mind that workers are very often trying to receive things that they don't have the right to. This is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a European labour market, and we have to point out that when people come in as migrants, they have an important contribution to make. They pay taxes and as well, and have a huge contribution to make to this European labour market.
Regner. Now, Siôn Simon, 1.5 minutes, please.
Mr. President, I'm very glad to have the opportunity to say that I believe the remarks earlier in the debate of Mr. de Graaff broke the rules of this House. I believe his remarks were explicitly racist and xenophobic and promoted racial intolerance in a way that is not acceptable or allowed in the Constitution of this House. And I would ask you, please, to see that after this debate, Mr. de Graaff's remarks, the record, is examined carefully. Exactly what he said is scrutinised by the President, and that if he is found to have broken the rules of this House, he should be censured, and he should not be permitted, and nobody should be permitted to come back in here with that kind of racist filth that this House is better than and doesn't accept. On the substance of the debate, Mr. President, I disagree with colleagues who said that we don't need to talk about this. I think it's very useful this week to be able to talk about labour mobility in the context of Switzerland and Norway and Iceland, all of which are recipients of hugely disproportionate influxes of EU citizens into their economies. That's what people need to understand. This is not about them coming here, it's actually about us going there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Blue card procedure.
Pan Gilles Lebreton.
Mr. Lebreton, would you accept it?
Pytanie. Panie pośle, bardzo proszę.
You can ask the question.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm very much attached to freedom of expression. I've suffered in my own country in terms of my rights for freedom of expression simply because I dared to express political opinions that didn't please everybody. And I think it's fundamental that in this Parliament at least there be an acceptance that there should be freedom of expression for each and every individual. And Mr. Simon, if you are as attached to freedom of expression as I am, because I was rather shocked by the way in which you think you can organise the thought police over Mr. de Graaff.
Proszę bardzo, pół minuty.
30 seconds.
Does that work? Yeah. Freedom of expression is not an absolute right, it's a privilege. You don't have the freedom to say anything you like, anytime you like, to anybody. This House has a rule, has a constitution which puts limits on the level of abuse and filth that you can bring in here. And that man crossed the line and broke the rules, and he should not be allowed to do it again.
Dziękuję, panie pośle.
Thank you so much. And now we move to the procedure Catch the Eye. Mr. Miguel Viegas.
Obrigado.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to speak about the application of these agreements with Switzerland. Some 120,000 Portuguese workers are in Switzerland in many different industries, building, metal industry, jewellery, and obviously many of them are suffering from the scourge of unemployment. Portuguese social security doesn't automatically recognise contributions paid into Switzerland as unemployment benefit or sickness benefit. So we support these things because they make it easier to harmonize social security rules and thus support these workers.
A teraz poproszę w imieniu Komisji Europejskiej panią.
And now, Madam Commissioner, Marianne Thyssen, on behalf of the European Commission.
Thank you well.
Thank you very much, President. President, honourable members, I'd like to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the warm words of welcome that you've given me here, coming to this house where I myself have worked and have spent many pleasant years. And thank you for the very useful and fruitful debate and the support that you have expressed here for the European programmes of EaSI and Progress and free movement of workers, the coordination of social security, and the fact that we want to share benefits that we have with colleagues and citizens from the EEA. I've heard some mention made of why this is on the agenda here in the Parliament. Well, it's the follow-on from the interinstitutional agreement between the Commission and the Parliament that there need to be statements, and if the Parliament asks the services of the Commission to make a statement, we're very happy to come here and make the statement that's been asked of us, and of course to listen to the comments that you have to make as well. A second point of criticism that was levelled at us was that in agreeing to these particular aspects, then we are allowing new rights for freedom of movement, but that is not the case. There are no new rights being accorded through these agreements. I think that needs to be corrected. There was a question raised about the timing of these amendments. Timing, according to some members, our Dutch friend Jeroen Lenaers, for example, thinks that this is coming too late. But the incorporation of the legislative acts in the international agreements have to happen as soon as possible after they have come into force in the European Union. So I think that timing is something that can be respected. There are a number of comments that have been made on the free movement of persons and also the referendum in Switzerland. The discussion of this evening's debate really doesn't allow us to cover that, but I can tell you that the Commission does, of course, have contacts with the European Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee to discuss what's going on in Switzerland on that front, and the Commission continues to put itself at the disposal of the Parliament's Foreign Affairs Committee to do that. There are a number of comments referring to the judgment handed down by the Court of Justice of the European Union, where there was a request to clarify German legislation, and I think that would break the bounds of this particular debate if I were to go into that, but I would call on colleagues to interpret the ruling of the Court of Justice properly. It's a question of well, the court has said that Germany does indeed have the possibility, under the conditions clearly set out in the particular judgment, to refuse the payment of certain social welfare benefits to certain individuals. But it is extremely complicated, it's extremely well defined, so I would encourage everybody to read that carefully. And it is a question that does take into consideration the free movement of people and does attempt to help clarify some of the German legislation. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you once again for all the comments that have been made, and you can certainly count on the European Commission to try and do its utmost to allow these programs that are set out here, EaSI and Progress, to make headway, and also the coordination of social security aspects and the free movement of persons and workers. Just one comment to Mrs. Jazłowiecka, the question that some of the countries of the EEA don't want to be part of some of the programs that are on the table here. Norway has announced that it will accede very quickly to the second part of the program, and Liechtenstein as well has decided not to participate in everything, but it's only for financial reasons that it's doing that. And if EEA countries are participating in the programs, then they, just as the European Union countries, have to pay their way. Liechtenstein has said that for financial reasons it would not be appropriate at this juncture to do that. Thank you very much for your comments and your attention.
Dank u wel. Thank you very much indeed, Madam Commissioner. Good luck and good night. Zamykam wspólną debatę.
And with this, I close our joint debate on this point on the agenda, and we move on to 1-minute speeches. On behalf of EPP, Mr. Roland.
La libre circulation des travailleurs est...
Free movement of workers is indeed an essential achievement, but it cannot become an instrument for social dumping. The Posting of Workers Directive was revised, and the President of the Commission expressed his intention to ensure it is fully implemented and to introduce a targeted review. In Belgium, sectors such as the construction sector are in danger, and since 2012, over 12,000 jobs have been lost. And worse things are to be feared if something doesn't change now. This dumping is a threat to the survival of companies and creates a climate of distrust among workers, as well as fueling rejection of Europe. A legal mechanism has been set up by the Belgian government to prevent abuse, but the European Commission is now threatening to take Belgium before the European Court of Justice. This is in contradiction with the expression of a real desire to actively combat social dumping. Jean-Claude Juncker rightly said that we have 5 years in order to succeed, so it's time that these words were translated into specific action by introducing real provisions to prevent social dumping. This is an essential challenge for Europe.
Thank you so much. Madam Maria Arena, the floor is yours.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Alors,
Thank you, Mr. President. I'm going to talk about a subject that may strike you as a bit lighter than the one that's just been mentioned, but it's just as important. It's football. In particular, a football match which may have a great effect on stability in the Balkans. In October there was a Serbia-Albania match, and something unacceptable happened, particularly when you see what happened in the stands. There were insults, profane insults addressed to the Albanian players. Now obviously the Union can't say anything